Okay, so hi everyone. I am Anna from GreenGeeks, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar by Kathy Zant, Best Practices for WordPress Security in 2025. And welcome, Kathy. We're always happy to have you at our webinars. Thank you
Love to be here.
Thank you. Real quick, I want to say a couple of words about GreenGeeks for those of you who may be tuning in and maybe watching this video on YouTube and are not familiar with us. We're a 300% green energy web hosting provider, which essentially means we put back 3 times the power we consume into the grid in the form of renewable energy. And we have been recognized by the US EPA since 2009 as a Green Power Partner. We offer share hosting, reseller hosting, VPS, and dedicated server. So now, moving on to the fun of the webinar, a few housekeeping items. If you come up with some questions during the presentation, please put them in the Q&A, and then Kathy will be answering them at the end of her presentation. You're also welcome to chat in the chat room, but remember that you have to select everyone if you want everyone to see what you're discussing. And as always, we are recording this presentation, so if you have to step away from your computer or your other devices, don't worry. We will send you a recording in a few days. And finally, we enabled live transcription, so you have the ability to enable them for yourself during the webinar by clicking on the show captions icon. And now I'm going to say hi and introduce Erica Barbosa from our GreenGeeks team. She will be assisting us with the chat and the Q&A. Hey, welcome, Erica. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Anna. Hi, everyone. I am Erica Barbosa from Costa Rica. Today, I'm going to be assisting the chat. Hope you enjoy today with Kathy, and thank you for being here.
Yes, it will be fun. I'm going to say a few words about Kathy, besides being a friend, a very good friend. Kathy is an internationally recognized expert on security, growth marketing, and profitable website development. Kathy has cleaned thousands of hacked sites and led incident response on high-profile intrusions for Fortune 100 companies. She has been working in information security for over 20 years, and she's spoken at countless events worldwide. She's passionate about your stories and believes everyone's voice deserves to be heard. So, Kathy, welcome. Would you like to say hi and maybe start sharing your screen and starting the presentation?
Yes, I am so happy to be here. First of all, I just want to say thank you to GreenGeeks. I always love your company, and every time I get to meet you guys at a WordCamp, it's always a joy. You guys do such a great service to all of the WordPress community, as well as, with renewable energy and a service to the world. So I am happy to be here and contribute all of the experiences that I've had, the knowledge that I've picked up along the way, and be of service as well. So I am just excited to be here. And thank you to everybody who's showing up. It's so nice to see so many people here. That's great. All right. Let me share my screen. You guys can see it, I hope.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, great. All right. Well, before I get started, I want to tell a little story because it gives you kind of an idea of why security, I think, is so important to me. I was at WordCamp US in 2019. It was in St. Louis, and the venue was in one place, and all the hotels, there was like a little bit of a walk. And one of my colleagues actually came across somebody who was in trouble. They were lying on the streets, and people were just walking by, and nobody was helping this individual that clearly needed help. He was in trouble. And my colleague actually helped that person. But it was curious to me that nobody stepped outside of their own problems, their own worries, their own maybe feeling a lack of security to be of help. They were all just kind of trapped within themselves. And I noticed as I work with people in the WordPress space and beyond, that when people don't feel secure, they can't live their best life. They can't be of service to the world. They can't give back. And so by giving you the tools you need in order to be empowered about your WordPress site, I am hoping that you feel more free to launch a new product, launch a new service, post that blog post. Security gives you a foundation of being of service to the world. So that's my mission. Little inspiring story there. But let's get started and let's talk about how we can do this. All right, I gotta switch my screen so that I can advance things, I think, because it is not wanting to advance for me. 1 second. Okay, here we go. All right, figured it out. All right, so my experience, I was a developer for many years, and my first security incident happened actually in the 1990s. Shows how old I am. I inherited a server from somebody, and they were highly technical, and I was told that they knew what they were doing, but that server got hacked. And instead of being able to blame someone else for the problem and send them to security school, I got sent to security school, and it was amazing. I learned so much about how to keep a server secure, how to keep sites secure. And so over the past 20 years, security has changed a lot, but the same principles still apply. So I've been cleaning hacked sites for a long period of time. I estimated over 3,000 of them. I've been to DEF CON and hung out with like the real scary hackers. So I have a ton of experience in this space, and I've given a lot of security talks. But let's talk about you and who's attacking you. Who are these people? I can tell you about being on an escalator at DEF CON and having Chinese hackers behind me talking and Russian hackers in front of me talking. And I'm like, wow, this really is a global issue. I mean, they could have been white hat hackers, black hat hackers, didn't really know, but they were there at DEF CON to learn more about security. It's not just some guy in a hoodie sitting in mom's basement trying to wreak havoc. It can be nation states that do hacking. It can be people who are just trying to see what they can do, learn something new. But 90% of the time, hackers want your site because they want two things. They want to take advantage of your server resources, and they want to take advantage of your domain reputation. It's not even the fact that, they want to take over your clients or things like that. It's really these two things. The ultimate motive that hackers have in exploiting sites is to make money. Maybe they want to get on a site and add spam links, or maybe they want to use your server resources to send out spam mailings. Maybe they want to put a phishing kit on your site that won't be blocked by that red screen of death that Google puts up when a site is flagged as malicious. Your domain reputation matters a lot. So they'll hide a phishing kit and then send out a mass mailing and hope people click on those phishing links and come to your site where they can then collect information and exploit people's credit card information or their passwords. They may want to use your site to spread malware. So somebody comes to your site and they redirect to a dangerous part of the internet where they're installing malware on people's computers. And of course, they put backdoors in there because they suspect that you'll eventually find some of the indications that your site was compromised. And they want to get back in when you wipe out those pieces of malware. So backdoors are typically on there as well. But the ultimate motive of hackers is really to make money. It's a profit motive. Now, why do hackers target small business WordPress websites? Well, WordPress is powering over 40% of the internet, and they understand economies of scale. Now, the New York Times, which uses WordPress, has a security operations team watching all of the network traffic. They have defenses. They expect small businesses to not have those defenses. So they expect you not to be doing as much about the security of your site. And according to PatchStack's State of WordPress Security report that they released last week, over 500,000 WordPress sites were hacked in 2024. So it's a juicy target. And once hackers learn how to get into a WordPress site, they can basically take that knowledge and apply it to other sites. But let's learn about what exactly they are doing. PatchStack's report was really state of the art, their State of WordPress Security white paper that they put out. Those 500,000 WordPress sites that were infected, they found that vulnerabilities, cross-site scripting was still the #1 vulnerability. So this would be a vulnerability most likely in a plugin that could be exploited by an attacker sending a specifically formed request to your site that allows them some type of access. Their report also showed that plugin vulnerabilities dominate. So 96% of all of the vulnerabilities in WordPress in 2024 actually came from plugins versus themes or WordPress core. And they also noted that user authentication challenges continue. Now, what is user authentication? It's your password. It's you becoming authenticated when you log into the site. There's also issues with session cookies being hijacked, and we will talk about that in a bit as well. This graphic came from PatchStack's report, and it's kind of hard to see, but basically it shows the flow of what happens with vulnerability disclosures. And that what it's basically showing us is PatchStack works with plugin developers. So the problem that a lot of developers have is that you will get these emails from a security researcher that basically say, we have found a vulnerability in your plugin, please pay us. And a lot of these things are not even vulnerabilities. And it just basically is a lot of white noise that just takes away the time from developers. So what PatchStack is now doing is they have a vulnerability disclosure and management program. So instead of a security researcher reaching out to the plugin developer, it goes to PatchStack. They filter out all of that noise, validate a security vulnerability report and say, yes, this is actually really a vulnerability, add protection within their systems while they are working with the plugin developer to make sure that gets patched. And basically, this graphic is showing that 33% of the vulnerabilities discovered in WordPress plugins were not fixed before they were publicly disclosed. So there's an actual process of things that happen. So these are just some of the statistics that we are seeing. I want to highlight also research that Thomas Rafe at We Watch Your Website has done. Now, Thomas basically watches websites, WordPress websites and others. His systems are monitoring the traffic and the security issues and the attacks that are happening across millions of websites. And there are a couple of things that he has noted. First of all, malware scanning plugins get compromised. Now, let's say you have a site and you've got, 10, 20, maybe even 30 plugins on that site. One of those plugins has a vulnerability and your site gets compromised. You have malware scanning plugin on there. But because your site is compromised, the hacker that gets into your site from a different plugin vulnerability can now go into the malware plugin, the scanner, and they can modify it because they've basically owned your site. So one of the things that he's noted is that malware scanning plugins aren't necessarily cracked up to all that they're cracked up to be, because they are operating within the same world as the hacker. They are operating using the same PHP that the hacker has compromised. So one thing that we will talk about later is different ways to protect your site rather than using plugins to scan for malware. Another thing that he noted in his research is that there are info stealers. Let's talk a little bit about how these work and how they affect cookies in WordPress. So what he has found is that you're accessing your WordPress site with your computer, maybe your iPad, maybe your phone. Well, our devices can get compromised with malware, and some of this malware is typed as an info stealer. Hackers are compromising computers, personal computers, and they are getting into the browsers, and they are stealing cookies, authentication cookies that basically tell, the WordPress site or anything else, you are who you say you are. So you may have noticed that if you log into your bank account and you're doing a little bit of accounting, paying some bills, and then you go make a cup of coffee and you come back and you're logged out already. Businesses, banks have all noticed that these info stealers are taking session cookies. So these sessions are shorter and shorter. The thing with WordPress is that when you log into your WordPress site, that session cookie lasts for 48 hours. And if you click Remember Me, it lasts even longer, up to 2 weeks. So those session cookies for WordPress are actually very valuable. So if a hacker gets into your computer and they can take one of these session cookies, they can use it to basically get into your WP admin just like you. And if they're in WP admin just like you, they can install a malicious plugin. They can get into all sorts of things. Your site is essentially compromised. And it didn't happen from a vulnerability. It didn't happen because you had a bad password. You might even have two-factor authentication installed on your site, but the session cookies bypass all of this. So this is some of his research and just some of the trends of things that are happening in the WordPress space at this time. And this has been prevalent. This has been happening for about a year. And Thomas's research is up on his site at wewatchyourwebsite.com. So we've talked a little bit about how hackers are getting in, and we can basically put it into two buckets. It's authentication issues like the session cookies, or people reusing their passwords. To this day, there are still people who reuse the same password everywhere. And these end up in databases that hackers share amongst each other. And if your passwords have been compromised, the prevalence of brute force attacks are, of course, a problem. They can use those passwords to just basically keep trying and log in. And of course, stolen session cookies is rather new authentication problem, but it's something that we need to be concerned with. Software vulnerabilities is the other bucket. And like we reported, plugins are 96% of that. And we're going to talk a little bit as we move on how we can protect ourselves from some of these trends. Now everybody wants to know about AI, right? What is the threat from AI? What is AI going to do for security? Well, AI is just basically a leverage to do the thing that you intend to do. So what I've noticed from developers who are using AI, a lot of security practices aren't necessarily, if you go into ChatGPT or Grok or any of them and have it write you a plugin to do something, security measures aren't necessarily considered. So it's easier to write vulnerabilities. I do think that AI is going to make it easier for security researchers to find vulnerabilities, but it's also going to make it easier for people who want to write scripts to exploit vulnerabilities to do that much faster. So all AI is really doing is it's taking the same principles and the same things that we've been seeing over the past few decades, and it's just going to make it faster. So it's going to shorten timeframes. There's going to be more zero-day vulnerabilities. These are vulnerabilities discovered by a hacker that get exploited, and security researchers are going to find things much faster, and there's going to be more vulnerabilities, because I know every single developer I know is like, oh, well, AI wrote this for me. I'm like, well, did you check to make sure that it's doing all of the session management right, that it's not used? I just saw somebody post some code for a plugin, and it was misusing a function in WordPress known as isAdmin, which is used as a test to see, are you on an admin page rather than are you an admin user? And people get this confused all the time, and AI has gotten it confused as well. So we're just going to see an acceleration of all of the things that we've seen over the past little while. All right, another trend that I am seeing, and this is not something that's necessarily new to WordPress, but because of issues that are happening in WordPress, there are new software repositories that are coming out. I have seen supply chain attacks happen to plugins in the WordPress space. Many years ago, 7, 8 years ago, there was a guy who bought plugins and put malware in them. It was found out very quickly and it was all shut down, but this is what we would call a supply chain attack. So what would happen is a user would go update their plugin, but because the plugin on the repository had malware in it, people were essentially infecting their own site with this. It looks like it's a valid plugin, but because it had changed hands and because no due diligence was done, malware was in that plugin. These are called supply chain attacks, where the supply chain of how software is delivered is actually compromised. So now we have these new software repositories that are coming out, like Aspire Press, and I'm watching this all very, very carefully just to see how things are going. But there's going to be new places where you can get WordPress plugins and WordPress themes. I know a lot of people who do things like find me a free version of this premium plugin, and they'll go find a site where it's free, but it is actually a plugin that's infected with malware on some other random site. And so these are called nulled plugins. They are taken they download the plugin from the repository, or maybe they buy a version of it, or they find it on a hacked site and they add malware to it, and then they put it up on a website and try to get people to download it. And basically people end up infecting their sites that way as well. So these risks exist out there now. I highly recommend just sticking with WordPress.org for now for where you get your software. But there's also a risk in WordPress, and this has been something security researchers have talked about for a long time, that the plugins, that the software is not code signed. And so security researchers and, all of the people on the repo and everything are talking about doing code signing, but as such, it hasn't been added yet. And code signing is just a verification that the source code that you're getting from .org is valid, that it is coming from the developer who wrote that plugin. So code signing is just sort of a check to make sure that the code is actually valid. So let's talk about the risks of security to smaller businesses, because I think it's important that we put this into sort of a context of how important this is. Now, 60% of small companies actually go out of business within 6 months of falling victim to a breach. And they risk a lot of things. They risk having all of their customer data exposed, personally identifiable information. There are, laws in many jurisdictions that if you have a breach, you need to report it to all of your customers that their information has been exposed. And if it happens, your credit card companies don't seem to like that very much. So you risk losing your credit card processing capabilities. So it really takes a toll on small businesses who are trying to do business online when they have a breach. All right, but AT&T tells us that they did a study showing that companies that have proactive security actually have better business outcomes. They have more growth, 24% sales growth over 3 years and 20% profit margins. Conversely, those who do not have proactive security policies have much lower growth. So for your boss who thinks security is not important, who wants into our small website? Who cares? It is important. And I have a theory about this. I have a theory that those who focus on security and actually pay attention to it actually have a better mindset. They actually are thinking about their business in a different way, and they're thinking about their website as an asset that needs to be protected. I mean, think about it. If your customers are using it, if it's where all of your leads are coming from, if you have an LMS, a learning management system on there, and you have students taking courses, and the site goes down and you can't take money in, your asset is no longer working for you. So this mindset of thinking about security and your website as an asset is critically important. All right, so we see what the trends are, but let's talk about what you can do about it. How do you protect your business? How do you protect the asset of your WordPress website? And who's responsible for all of this? I know a lot of people who don't think it's their responsibility, and it's just like, oh, my host just takes care of everything. Hosts are doing so much more for security now, and I love that. GreenGeeks has great security tools available and great protection on their network, and that's awesome. But none of it's any good if you're not making sure that everyone associated with your site and your business is taking security on as their responsibility. Anybody who has access to your WordPress site needs to be thinking about security. People who have access to your house, if they have a key to your house, don't you want them to make sure that that key to your house is well protected, or that they're not just like leaving it at the Starbucks? If somebody has access, they need to take responsibility. And as a small business owner, it's really important that you make it a priority, and make it a priority that is commensurate to the job that they have been hired to do. I'll talk a little bit about just planning, because if you want good business outcomes and you're thinking about your WordPress site as an asset, you need to think about the fact that it is not if your site gets hacked. You need to think about when your site gets hacked. You need to consider the fact that your site will probably be, well, it's under attack right now. I mean, malicious attack is just kind of the background noise of the internet. It's happening right now as you're sitting on this webinar. There are probably malicious scripts that are probing for vulnerabilities on at least one of the sites that you have. It's just a part of our lives. As such, you need to be prepared for the worst case, because when you're prepared for the worst case and the worst case actually does happen, it shortens the time frame of impact. For example, if someone gets into your site and in 10 minutes, you can take action, restore from a backup, lock the site down, go through the log files and figure out exactly what happened so you can learn from it and prepare. If it happens and you don't know for 10 hours, restoring from a backup for like a commerce site especially is much more difficult. And I know you won't believe this, but I have actually cleaned up sites that were hacked for like 10 months. And the site owner didn't know. And they didn't know until they realized that their site wasn't appearing in Google search anymore. And they had a penalty on them. It wasn't a red screen, but they had a penalty on them for malware. And they just didn't know. Being aware of your security is going to give you the tools and the ability to take action as fast as possible, because if you can shorten that time frame, it minimizes the impact. The worst thing in the world, if you're an agency, is to get a call from your customer saying, hey, one of my customers let me know that there's something wrong with the site. As an agency, by monitoring all of your customers and making sure that their sites are secure, you can take action and fix things and be proactive and be that asset to your client. We noticed that the site got hacked. It looks like, Jane in the front office might have had a bad password. We saw some things here, but don't worry, we took care of everything, but Jane's going to need to, reset her password. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. Your client is never going to fire you when you are taking that kind of proactive action to make sure that their asset is well protected. So being able to uncover problems if there's a vulnerability, being able to patch those things before a hacker finds things, incredibly important. Now, at the end of this presentation, I'm going to have a link where you can get a checklist for a security audit. I recommend doing it every 3 months. Some people do it every year. Security is also, it depends on the asset, right? Your lawnmower in the shed, somebody steals it, you buy a new lawnmower, no big deal. But, your computer or, your kids' stuff or your kids, different security, different asset, different value, different importance to you. So depending on the asset, you're going to have a different kind of risk analysis of how important it is. If all of your business's revenue is coming from your website, might be something that you're doing every month. But I'll have a link for that at the end of the presentation so you can get that checklist and do security auditing yourself. And it's not just, the front end of your website. I just wanted to put this up so that you understand that there's a number of different ways, different access points for getting at the content of your site. Of course, there's the HTTP, HTTPS, but there's also file transfer protocol, or FTP, where you can get access to the files of your site. There's SSH, where people can get access via a command line and manipulate files on the site. There's your hosting panel. How often do you think about the security of your hosting panel and making sure that that is secure as well? Of course, there's the WP admin, making sure that that is secure and that everybody who has a user account has a strong, unique password and also maybe two-factor authentication. There's also XML-RPC and the REST API, which are programmatic ways to communicate with your site. And then there's another tool called phpMyAdmin, which is a collection of PHP files that allow you to kind of get at the underlying database of your WordPress site. All of these things need to be considered when you're thinking about your WordPress security. So we talked about some of the problems with authentication, and here are some key factors that we need to consider. Strong, unique passwords everywhere. Use a password manager. So I know a lot of people are like, okay, I heard what happened with LastPass. And a few years ago, LastPass had a breach that exposed all of their customers' vaults. And I know a couple of people that I've consulted with who had those vaults exposed. It was a pretty scary thing. All of your eggs are in one basket, right? So I know a lot of people are like, oh, I've got my own password manager strategy. Hackers can't get into that because they don't know what I'm doing here. Password managers are still the way to go. 1Password is great. Bitwarden is an open source password manager that allows you to, it's like $10 a year for the paid version. And then you can have it on your phone, your tablet, your desktop as well. But if you are still scared of a password manager, there is something called the blind password strategy. I'm going to explain real briefly how that works. So the website you're logging into, let's say it's your bank account, and you don't want to put that bank account password into your password manager because it's that critically important. So that password is in there, and then you have part of the password stored in your password manager. So there's a long 12-digit, very unique password there. But then there's a 4-digit code that you only have in your head. And so you copy it out of your password manager, you put that into your bank account website, and then you take that 4-digit number and you add that to the end of your password when you type it in. So it's not the same thing that's in your password manager, but it still logs in because you take that from your password manager, put it into your bank's website, take that 4-digit number that you've set, and boom, that's the blind password strategy. That way, if your password manager, if you are scared about it, and you don't need to do this for every single thing, I'd say, security is a continuum, right? You have the most secure computer, which is encased in cement and buried 6 feet underground. Not very usable. And then you have your test website where the password is password123, because if it gets hacked, who cares? I'll just wipe it out, right? It has zero importance to me, but there are my bank accounts, which are incredibly important, but I still want access. I don't want them buried in the backyard, right? So security is a continuum. So every single asset you have, every single login that you have, you're treating it, you're assessing the risk for it on a different scale. Not everything needs to be treated the exact same way. If it's just your blog, maybe you just have your password in your password manager and you don't need to do the blind password because you've got backups, and if it gets hacked, you don't have to do notifications and it's not going to affect your business, that type of thing. But you need to make those decisions for yourself for every asset that you have. I highly recommend for WordPress two-factor authentication. Now, this isn't in core. So you will need a plugin for this. There is a standalone plugin that does this. The security plugins like WordPress, Solid Security, and a few others, they also have two-factor authentication as a feature within them. Two-factor authentication basically asks you for another set of numbers after you put in your username and your password. So you type in your username, your password, and then it asks you for the 2FA code. I highly recommend using something like Google Authenticator and use that base for your two-factor authentication. I don't think anybody in the WordPress space now does the SMS based. I know a lot of our banks are still doing it, but there's some security issues with that. If you want to go into the deep recesses of what that's all about, I have videos on my YouTube channel that you can go watch. But two-factor authentication with an authenticator app for your WordPress site is very important. If you have multiple people logging into your site, let's say you have job postings and you want to make sure that HR just does it and you don't want to bother the web developer who's creating all of this code. So you give access to the HR department. Do they need access to plugins? They don't need access to plugins. So you want to give them access to only the things that they need in order to do the job you've hired them to do. This principle in security is called the principle of least privilege. And so you only give access to people for the things that they need to do their job. I highly recommend if you have a small business and you are onboarding new employees, you keep a record of what you give access to, because you do not want to have somebody leave. Maybe they get disgruntled and then all of a sudden they still have access to a social media account and post something inappropriate, that type of thing. You definitely don't want them having access to your WordPress site. So keep records of what you give access to people and make sure you shut that down if somebody does indeed leave. Protecting your software. Very important. And this isn't just your plugins and your themes and your core. You're probably tired of hearing security professionals talking about keep everything updated. It's your FTP application if you're accessing the site via FTP. It is your browsers. If you're using Chrome, Chrome has had some zero-day vulnerabilities that were actively exploited. So when you see relaunch to update Chrome in the upper corner, if I see a live stream and somebody's got that, I'm just like, oh gosh, please just click that just for my own sanity. It drives me absolutely crazy when it's there. It's like, for me, it's a stop everything. I'm going to fix my Chrome because I don't know what kind of, we don't really get a lot of details about what is going on there until later. So assume something's going on and keep your browser updated. This also goes for your systems. This goes for Mac OS. Goes for your phone, goes for your tablet as well. If there is an update for all of your devices, make sure they get updated. And if you are working from home and you have children with phones, make them update their phones as well, because I know they're not going to. Ask me how I know. My daughter never updates. So but they're on your network, right? So what happens if there's a severe vulnerability on your kid's phone and who knows what they're visiting on TikTok? I don't know. And they end up having a vulnerability that affects your network. The last pass breach that happened a couple of years ago happened because of a media player. Was it a media player or media server application on a developer's home computer that wasn't updated, and it caused all kinds of havoc. So if you have people who work from home and they're accessing your systems from home, that has to be in scope as well for you to consider security, because it can affect everything. We've seen it happen before. Let's talk a little bit about software you're not using. I'm sure you have tons of apps on your phone you're not using. What about your WP admin dashboard? How many plugins are in there that you don't use regularly? I see this often when I am doing an audit and I see that people have the file manager plugin in their WP admin, or they've got the duplicator plugin. These are plugins that are super handy to have, right? I mean, you're working on something and you just want to check and see if a file is there. File manager is extremely useful, but are you using it all the time? Probably not. It is not necessary for the front-end operation of your site. So if it's there, let me tell you a story. File Manager actually had a vulnerability. It was a 0-day vulnerability many years ago. Let's say it was 2018, I'm going to say, or 2019. And this vulnerability was exploitable even if the plugin wasn't activated. So let's say you had a site, you had File Manager plugin on the back end, but it wasn't active, but it was still there. It was not only exploitable, but it bypassed many firewalls. It was a pretty severe vulnerability that led to a number of hacked sites. So don't just deactivate things. Make sure that you take the extra step of removing things. You can always go reinstall it later the next time you need to use it, but don't just leave software on your systems, because the more code that you have, the more chance of a vulnerability being there. Better to just keep it as minimized as possible. All right, functional isolation. You know what? I want to talk about, I just remembered authentication. I want to go back to that for a second because I did not add it to the slide, but it just popped in my head. Cookies. If you are not if you log into your site and you do a few things and you're done, it's time to just log out. Especially if you have issues with, Chrome not being updated and things like that. That's where those vulnerabilities end up on computers. So if you are logging into your site to do something, don't keep a persistent login. Log out, because when you click log out of your WordPress site, then it kills that cookie. So even if your computer gets compromised, the cookie's gone. It's not even usable, so it can't be exploited. So set that as a rule for all of the people who are accessing WordPress from their home computers, from the office computer. Make sure they are clicking log out, because then those cookies get killed and your site is not then vulnerable to that type of attack. All right. Sorry about that. I should have added that to that slide, but boy, it got loud in my head for a second. Let's talk about functional isolation. I have cleaned many sites that are using a system called cPanel, and cPanel has an option where you can do add-on domains. So you can have as many WordPress sites as you can get in there. I once cleaned a site that had 30 sites in a cPanel. The problem is that they're all running under the same PHP-based user. Now, these 30 sites were put there by an agency, and all of his client sites were there. And he gave WP admin administrator access to all of his clients as well, so that they could manage, do things on the site. One of his clients had a reused password. Somebody got that password, logged into that one single site. They went to the theme editor and they rewrote the 404 page for that particular site to be a backdoor. And once they had that backdoor, they were able to infect all 30 sites, not just the site that they got access to. So when you're putting everything into one place, the risk goes up. And I have tons of agencies who are like, well, we do this because it saves us money and it's a lot easier. It's just all in one place. Every site that you put in there, just consider, every site makes the risk go higher. One site, and you're monitoring it and you catch a hack within a few hours, not a big deal. 30 sites and you catch a hack within a couple of days, well, probably one of those customers is going to be like, hey, what's wrong with my site? But your cleanup job is much worse for 30 sites than it is for just dealing with one site. So isolate your sites to make sure that they are all operating under one server-based user. And then also, if you have like an LMS and then you have commerce and you have other things, a membership site, consider functionally isolating those as well. The less things you have going on a site, the better. And let's talk about backups as well. Backups can be the first line of defense. You catch that there's a problem with the site, boom, 10 minutes, restore from a backup, change all of the passwords. And that means changing the passwords for WP admin, for FTP, for the hosting panel, for every other access point. A backup can save you from these kinds of problems very quickly, but also make sure that you test the restoration of your backups, because if a backup doesn't work, it's not really a backup. So set up a staging site, restore, does everything look okay? The last thing you want to do is to restore a site and find out that it's not backing up images. Oh no, then what are you going to do? That's not really a backup. It's not going to help you. Protecting access, let's talk about Cloudflare. It is not just performance, but it is awesome for performance. They also have application firewall. They even have tools that are specific for WordPress. It just filters out a lot of that background noise. They also have a tool called Turnstile, which is just like CAPTCHA, but you don't have to go select all of the fire hydrants and everything like that. It works in the background and detects whether or not it is a bot or human. And these things are helpful for spam form submissions and also for carding attacks. So Cloudflare is an amazing solution. A lot of their stuff is free. I think it should be on pretty much every site. And like I said, fast detection, fast response. You want to be notified right away if there's any file changes, if there's any malware. So there's a number of security tools that will do this. A lot of hosting providers like GreenGeeks. I think GreenGeeks, you guys do this, file monitoring, file integrity checking, network monitoring. These are the types of things that tell you right away that you have a problem and it needs a solution right away. So the faster you know, the faster you can take action. And there is my final little slide there. I am excited if you guys have any questions. You can learn more about me at Zant.com. If you go to Zant.com/GreenGeeks, you can get that audit checklist. And I also have some courses at KathyZant.com. If you sign up for that audit checklist, I will send you some more information about those courses along with the audit checklist if you're interested. I also have a solution that I did with Nathan Ingram called Monster Secure that is very specific for agencies. You know, the agencies, you've got like people who don't know WordPress at all, but you want them to understand like the very, very basics of security. You can go to Monster Secure and learn more about that. The course, you can go through it yourself for free, but we also have tools available so that, you know, agencies can integrate it in with their contracts so that, you know, have a client who says, yes, I will take a security course to make sure I'm making good security decisions for my site. So I just wanted to mention that as well. Just another service that we have for WordPress agencies.
Thank you, Kathy. I wanted to ask you, you also have a YouTube channel, right, that you can share?
Yes, you could just go search Kathy Zant. It's just at Kathy Zant on
At
YouTube.
Kathy's.
And I have not been posting. I started a podcast and that's been taking my attention. And there hasn't been like anything like super exciting in security in a while. And so nothing's caught my attention enough where I've been like, oh, I drop everything and do a security video. But there's some older ones on there about SIM swapping attacks. The LastPass stuff is all up there that if you're interested in that. Some of the stuff about browser extensions. There was actually a security thing recently about browser extensions. Just think of, you know, you put those extensions into Chrome. We're WordPress people. You understand the issue of like a WordPress plugin and how introducing that code into your WordPress environment causes issues. Extensions in Chrome can cause similar malicious issues, and we are seeing some issues with that as well. So,
Great.
yeah.
Fantastic. We have a couple of questions here I see in the Q&A from Darcy. If you don't cover this, which I think you didn't really go through a list, there are some WordPress plugin to back up your site. Do you have any recommendation which one to use and which ones make it easy to restore the site?
Yeah, Updraft Plus was one that I have used. You know, GreenGeeks does backups for sites, right? You guys
Yes,
have your
yes,
backup. Yeah.
of
So,
course.
yeah. So if your hosting provider is doing backups, you can, rather than using a plugin that, you know, it does take time to do that. And you want to make sure that WordPress is available to, you know, these site visitors, and you want all of your resources available to that. So if your hosting provider is doing backups, that's great. I would also take those backups and find a way to make sure that they are being stored off of the server, that they're not stored in the same place as your site. Now, Updraft Plus does, I think their paid version does the copy to a different place, but the free version just backs it up onto your hosting account. The problem with those is similar like with the malware scanners that are also there. Hackers get access to your site, they get access to your backups, they get access to your log files. I've seen so many hacks that happen where they wipe out the log files, and I'm like, what the heck happened here? They must be trying to hide a 0-day because they're wiping out log files so that there's no evidence of how the hack happened. So I really highly recommend making sure that you have your backups and your log files. If it's in a critical site, make sure that those are stored. And I recommend to people for a high value asset that you back them up for a year and keep them off of the server. Put them on a Google Drive that's secure, put them in Dropbox or something like that, and just make sure that you have them for a year in case there is ever any kind of incident that is long range. So that's the typical security recommendation.
Great. Someone is in the chat is saying that Updraft Plus can back up to offsite storage like a Google Drive.
Okay.
Thank you for
Awesome.
sharing, Tom.
Thank
And
you,
then-
Tom. I haven't used it in a while, so my hosting provider has a system that does it all. So
Okay, great. A couple more questions from Catherine. If you close the browser without logging out, are the cookies still removed?
no, the cookies are still resident if you close the browser. So, and you don't want to have to go through and like delete all cookies. That's kind of a nightmare. So, because it logs you out of everything, right? And there's some things, but it's really important to consider this, because if there is an important asset, even for like a social media account, like you're managing a social media account for a business and you have that cookie stored and you're like persistent login, it might be advantageous for you to delete those cookies as well. But closing the browser down does not kill the cookie. You have to actually go click log out, and that kills the cookie. It just wipes it out. It tells the server this cookie is no longer being used. And so the session is gone, because the problem is browser-based anything does not maintain a session. It doesn't say, oh, I know you forever. So in order to do that, the only way to do it is through cookies. And you'd get to decide how long that cookie lasts. And if you don't want it to last long, click log out.
Good. We have a question here from Sergio. Is there any plugin for security that you strongly recommend?
I am leveraging more and more not using plugins, because I don't want my site to be doing the security work. Many of the security plugins are heavy. When they're doing a malware scan, especially, they take a lot of server resources. I want the server resources to be available to the site visitors. So I am relying on hosting providers to provide that. I am relying on Cloudflare to provide that. And then I have a very lightweight two-factor authentication plugin. I do use WordFont still to this day on a couple of sites. I've got solid security on a couple of other sites, just because I watch what's going on with all of them. But I don't have one that I think is like, oh my gosh, this is the one. I work with a lot of people who are going through like carding attacks. They have WooCommerce up, and then hackers will get a list of credit card numbers and they're testing them to see which ones are valid. And so they use like small business websites. Well, it's a huge nuisance and a problem. And none of the security tools necessarily are filtering that all out. But I've seen some chatter that Clean Talk does it really well. So that's another one that I'm going to research. They all have their advantages. Solid security, they have passkeys. I think passkeys are amazing. And I was actually working with that team when they developed passkeys. And I think it's awesome. WordFence doesn't have that, but they have a very robust firewall. So each of the tools has their own benefits. You'll have to decide, just like on that security continuum and your risk analysis, what things are non-negotiable for you, and decide which features you need the most.
Okay. We have here another question from, I guess, BF. Cloudflare DNS 1.1.1.1 and 1.001 tests are not TLS Secure DNS. Have you had any thoughts on DNS security and availability?
DNS security and availability. I haven't thought about that for a while. I don't know that I have an answer for that.
It's fine. Judy is saying, thank you, Kathy. Are there any particular vulnerabilities and protections I need to be aware of for a personal, non-monetary forum site?
Okay, yeah. The thing to consider with a forum site where you have a number of different users logging in is to realize that everyone who has access can be an intrusion vector from the standpoint of a privilege escalation vulnerability. So if you have a vulnerability on your site, and it's like no big deal for most things, but if somebody gets any kind of access and they can escalate their privileges, then they can act as an administrator. And we've seen those kind of privilege escalation vulnerabilities. So you might see a vulnerability come across, one of the security companies' reports, and it's got a lower score, but it's a privilege escalation vulnerability. For that particular site, it would be a more critical vulnerability because you have a number of different people who have lower level access and so the exposure, the attack surface is much higher because you have so many people who are logged in to that forum.
Yeah, definitely. Emily's asking, what about passkeys for authentication?
I love passkeys. I really do. I think they're amazing. Solid Security has that. I don't know if it's pro or not. I think it might be. But yeah, I love passkeys because there's no password. It's biometrics. You basically so I use them everywhere. A lot of sites like Stripe, they have it as a second factor. You log in with your username and password, but use a passkey as that second factor of authentication instead of 2FA. I love that because I hate 2FA, even though I'm in security. I've seen all of the worst things that could possibly happen, right? But I still hate 2FA and finding my phone and, can I erase it? It's going to change. Can I get that number in there fast enough? Yeah, I hate it. It's a terrible experience, but most security is a terrible experience. So passkeys are pretty awesome. I like them a lot, and so I do use them.
Yeah, I love passkeys too. Andreas is asking if I install Didomi, I'm not really sure what that is, on my WordPress site, will I be able to control the cookies?
I am not familiar with Didomi. I am not familiar with Adobe. I do know there's a plugin, persistent login, and you can set it to like never log you out. And I'm wondering if there's a setting to like make cookies. Who else has that? There's somebody else there's a few security tools out there. It might be Calvin Elkin from Sneeko. I know he's got Fortress that's on GridPane that has, oh, it's you're not doing anything? Logged out. That's very extreme security, but typically speaking, just have your users log out. Just make them log out, make it a priority for them. But you need to be, if it's just the thing is with security, there's not just one thing, right? If you update Chrome all the time or your browsers, if you're updating your operating system so that the info stealers can't get on these devices and you're making people log out, you're just putting as many hurdles as possible. You have to do a lot of different things, a multi-pronged approach. It's not just like, oh, do this one thing and your site's going to be safe. There's just so much to consider. That's why I always talk about incident response and just like start thinking about when your site gets hacked instead of if your site gets hacked, instead of, because it's not an if. There's so many things that you have to manage. And unless you're going to be the New York Times with the security operations team watching every packet that comes across the wires, you're going to see something sometime. So just be prepared for it and know what to do.
Yeah. Alan is saying, why is so much spam content hosted on Cloudflare and why are they so bad about cleaning it up?
I'm not sure about that.
You're not. Okay. Moving on to Lena. Lena is saying that recently noticed an influx of emails assuming spam bots come through my newsletter form. Any recommendation?
Yeah, I would put something like Turnstile, Cloudflare's Turnstile, or reCAPTCHA on there. That will help. Turnstile is pretty good. I'm not having any problems whatsoever. Also, putting your site behind Cloudflare, that filters out a lot of the, garbage traffic of the internet. So you'll want just some kind of protection, spam protection on your newsletter form.
Yeah, great. Samira is asking, can you please suggest what is the best solution for having a secure WooCommerce WordPress website? As I can see many hackers trying to log in on an everyday basis. Please suggest a workable solution so that the customer credentials stay protected.
Yeah, you want a firewall to block out a lot of that malicious traffic. So like Cloudflare, your hosting provider may have a firewall solution available to you. That WordFence could be possibly a solution because you just want to block out as much of that malicious traffic coming at your site, because you need to have it freely available for your customers to log in, right? You could try using passkeys from Solid Security and offer passkeys to your end users, and that way if there's no passkey, there's no like phishing, there's no login. The passkeys can't get phished. I have a video on my YouTube channel about passkeys if you want to learn more about them. But for something like that, I would go with Solid Security and their passkey solution, because if you just have your customers set up a passkey, and that's going to take away the incentive.
Yeah,
There's nothing to do.
passkeys. Oscar is asking, how about changing WP login in WordPress to something else to make it hard for hackers to try to log in? Is that a good
Yeah.
strategy?
That is what we call in security by obscurity. It's not really hiding the login because a lot of the brute force attacks that come, you will see. I would highly recommend just like turning off XML RPC. And you can do that via code. Security plugins always have a toggle where you can turn that off because most of those attacks are coming through there. Your login form, when you hide it, it can break other plugins. It can cause issues. The funniest issue is that a lot of people forget where they hid it. And then they're like, I don't know where it is. I hid it somewhere and I don't know where it is. And so they end up locking themselves out of the WP admin because they don't know where they hid the login form, right? But most of the attacks for brute force logins are not coming through the login form. They're coming through XML RPC. Turning that off is going to get rid of a lot of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. One last question here, see from Alan. I get a ton of spam in my contact form, which uses the Contact Form 7 plugin. What are some good ways to reduce that?
Yeah, that's if you're getting a lot of spam submissions, you're still going to get a few, but Turnstile just gets rid of a lot of that. My husband's website, he's got a LearnDash and an LMS system on it, and I was getting all these like spam subscribers because I need to have it open for like create a new account so that people can create an account and maybe buy one of his courses. And there were just so many of them. And I've tried tons of different solutions, and I'm going to try the Clean Talk now, but Turnstile lowered it, but it didn't eliminate it. So he's not even really working anymore. So it's just up as a service to his old clients and stuff like that. But I want to keep it open, if somebody wants to take one of his courses. So yeah, it's a problem and it's happening all over the place. So, and a solution you try now, it might not work later. So, so I'd try Clean Talk. I hear good things about that. I would try and Turnstile and just see which one is working for you.
Okay, I see one last question popped up because we're
Sure.
out of time. Emily, how can I tell if XML RPC is being used on the site? I'm afraid to turn it off and break things.
Yes. If you're using Jetpack, you can't turn it off because Jetpack is communicating with WordPress.com and doing things. That is the big one where you don't want to turn it off. I should have said that. I hope nobody signed off and is like, oh, let's go do that now. Yeah, if you're using Jetpack, I know for sure, do not turn off XML RPC. But test. turn it off and see. Turn it off using a plugin. Don't do it the programmatic way. Turn it off using a plugin so you can just toggle things and see if everything is okay. 90% of the time, it's going to be just fine. And you'll turn that off and it'll keep away a lot of those malicious brute force attacks that are coming through XML or PC. But yeah, if you're using Jetpack, try one of the security solutions.
Great. I think wait, maybe one more question, I think, is popping up again. One more minute.
No problem.
Do you know if there is an alternative to the WordPress app, FPR Mobile, since it uses XML RPC? It's a mouthful.
Yeah, isn't that if you're doing mobile postings and things like that, it's going to use XML RPC and it's using the whole like Jetpack thing. So yeah, that's how it works. So
No
I
alternative
don't know of
then.
a solution. I
Okay.
don't use WordPress on mobile at all.
Okay.
I just don't
Thank
find
you.
it to be a pleasurable experience.
Great. I think the questions keep popping up, and so I know
No
that we have
problem.
to.
I can stick around.
It is very much necessary to use Jetpack for WooCommerce sites. Samir is asking.
There are some. I have a friend who's texting me answers to like Clean Talk has a terrible website. Like, yes, they do. Hi, I didn't know you were here. Um, yeah, so you can use WooCommerce and not use Jetpack, but there are some things that are tied to Jetpack. So I know who did I tell to take Jetpack off and they said I can't. It's doing this like some shipping thing or tax calculate. I don't know. One of those like additional features where they had to have Jetpack. So
Okay. Great. Okay, I think we don't have any more questions for today. So I'm gonna let everybody go back to work. And Kathy, we'll see you in Phoenix next month.
next
Will you
month,
be
yes.
at
Yes.
PressConf?
I
Okay.
gotta get my tickets, but yeah, it's on the plans.
Yeah, we will be there, Eric and I.
Awesome.
Thank you everyone for staying till the end, and don't forget to keep watching for our webinars upcoming at greengeeks.com/webinars. We're going to have one on email marketing in next month, and then one on some AI and web development. So keep watching, and thank you, Kathy. I always like your webinars on security, and I always
Oh, do
learn
you?
something that I should be
Awesome.
doing. Yeah. I
Awesome. I'm glad
always
to be of
learn something.
service. Like I said, I'm here to empower people so that they can live their best life and not be afraid of these pesky little hackers. So
Great, thank you. And thank you, Erica, for your help and
Thank you, Anna.
looking at the
Kathy.
chat and the Q&A. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
We'll see you soon, okay?
see you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye,
Bye-bye. Bye,
everyone.
everyone. Bye.